Hi, my name is Marty Zla, and it's an honor and a privilege for me to share this time with you at the request of two special people in my own life, John and Olive Drain. I was privileged to work with John on a couple of courses that I was a student, and he helped to mentor me through my doctoral work for the Doctor of Ministry program at Fuller some years ago. And as it will become clear why, as I talk to you today, it was on the subject of maximizing pilgrimage experiences as an instrument of spiritual maturity for parishioners at this church where I serve. I am at St. Joseph's Episcopal Church here in Boynton Beach, Florida, and I have been here since March of 2001. So I am into my 20th year here, and we have over the years developed quite a culture of pilgrimage here at St. Joseph's, and I would like to share with you some of the history and the impact of that as we go forward. And if you are watching this particular video prior to the next one, where we have our select participants from our pilgrimages over the years talking, it will make a lot more sense, I think, to you to have seen this one first. So when I was gifted with becoming the pastor here at St. Joseph's, I came to a church that was embarking on a program for our youth called Journey to Adulthood. And Journey to Adulthood happens to be a program of formation for young people. And you see the link to it there if you might be interested in that, or perhaps you are familiar with it. But that particular program, Journey to Adulthood, which starts with students who are going into the 6th grade, so basically it's when they finish their Sunday school. They have a Right 13 program for a couple of years, then a J2A, Journey to Adulthood program for a couple of years, and it culminates with their pilgrimage experience. Now, the program is designed that this pilgrimage experience can go to any particular special pilgrimage place for the particular church or denomination. But when we came into it, we decided to concentrate on Celtic pilgrimage and have done that ever since. So what you see in this slide, we started to develop as we went along a process of sort of honoring each of those pilgrim groups that would go. And as you see over the years, there are 13 crosses and 13 group photos that represent each of those pilgrimage groups. 12 of these 13s are Celtic pilgrimage. There is one pilgrimage we did to the Holy Land, but the rest of them have all centered upon the two, as we would call them, thin places of Iona and Lindisfarne. Each of those pilgrimage classes chooses a cross that we purchase when we are in Iona or Lindisfarne, and it is somewhat symbolic of their pilgrimage experience. And that cross is then placed into our sacristy, the dressing area of our church, and it becomes just sort of a reminder to us all of those who have done that pilgrimage along the way. We have had over 100 people over the years who have done these pilgrimages, so we have done quite a few of them. And as one who came from Motorola in my corporate career, and we were into continuous improvement processes, we have certainly honed that pilgrimage experience over the years in terms of making it more effective, or as my doctoral work was titled, Maximizing the Pilgrimage Experience. So that's how we got started with it. And this is something we always start with our people who might be interested in it. It's not just going on a trip. There's a difference between a tourist and a pilgrim. And so I don't know who gets for crafting these words, but they certainly do pictures, but the pilgrim grows into the image. A tourist says, I've been somewhere, but the pilgrim reports, I've become someone. For me, I think that summarizes that becoming that we have seen over and over again happens with both of our youth and our adults who choose to go on pilgrimage also. We link our pilgrimage experience quite a bit to the life of the congregation. This particular photo shows the commissioning ceremony that we do for all of our pilgrimage groups. They come before the altar, and there is a prayer partner that is assigned to each of these pilgrims. They go with their adult facilitators and myself. And this is one of those earlier pilgrimages where we are conducting that service right before they leave to go to the airport and begin that experience together. We do something else that sort of keeps the congregation's mind focused on this. And this is actually something that we started when John and Olive workshop for our congregation. And what we did is when the ceremony was completed with the commission of the church, the clowns in their ministry followed them with imprints of their shoes that also had their names written on it. And then we taped all of these names of the pilgrims on the floor of the main aisle of the church. And those footprints remained on the floor of the church facing outward for that whole time that those pilgrims were actually on their experience. A reminder to the congregation to continue to pray for them. On the Sunday when they came back and we had the re-entry rite and the welcoming home rite, those footprints were then turned around facing forward in the opposite direction that they are there. Just another way that we keep the congregation focused on the fact that we all are on pilgrimage. It's just that a select few of us are actually traveling. It is a process that we go through, and to go to the island of Iona is quite a journey to go there, because you fly from the States to a gateway city, usually somewhere up east. And if it's Philadelphia or New York, then you fly across the ocean, sometimes directly into Scotland. Sometimes we have to connect through Heathrow in London, and then make their way from there. When they get into Edinburgh, Glasgow, we spend a couple of days with activities just so they can get over the jet lag and their luggage can catch up with them. And then we travel to the west coast of Scotland to a town called Oban, where we get on a ferry, take the ferry across from Oban over to the east coast of the island of Mull. And then when you get to Mull, you have to get on a bus, and then you have to transfer all the way across to the west coast of Mull, about an hour, very windy, bumpy ride. And when they get there, they get on another ferry boat, a smaller one that you see depicted here, that takes them on a short 10 to 15 minute ride across the channel to the island of Iona. Once they get to the island of Iona, then we have to walk, because there is no transportation, about a 40-minute walk to the youth hostel where we set up our pilgrimage. There is something to be said for that particular process of going through all of that and all of that travel, because there is disconnecting that we sort of are physically going through, but perhaps emotionally and spiritually at the same time that we are going on a retreat pilgrimage experience. This becomes an important aspect of it all. Most of the people who write on pilgrimage and the sort of psychology of it will enter it into different stages. And one of those stages that seems to be consistent is the fact that there is this part of the pilgrimage of what's called liminality, of sort of this disorientation of going to a place that is different from where you have been before, of adapting practices and schedules and routines that are different than you're used to. And this has been especially important for our youth as time has gone on. We have adapted what we call technology-free pilgrimages. So the youth do not bring any Wi-Fi enabled devices, no phones, no iPads, no tablets, no laptops. And a lot of times they will say, well, that's what I use for my camera, but we don't bring cameras because we know the temptation is just too great to slip back into getting in touch with Facebook and Instagram and everything else, emails and texting, that we sort of lose the momentum that we're trying to achieve. So that gives you an idea of just what we begin with the journey itself. We do spend a lot of time on the pilgrimage with giving a chance for reflection and giving the youth, and when it is an adult pilgrimage, the adults a chance to reflect, giving them also journals, as journaling becomes a spiritual discipline that we like to expose, especially our youth to give them the time to reflect on the thoughts and the feelings that they are having as we go through that pilgrimage experience. There are many writings that talk about the theology of place. And I really love this line from T.S. Eliot in The Little Gidding, where he's talking about a pilgrimage to a particular place. And he writes, "You are not here to verify, instruct yourself, or inform curiosity or carry report. You are here to kneel where prayer has been valid." We go to where I believe prayer has been valid, this island of Iona, famous because it is where Saint Columba came back in the 6th century with 12 monks and set up shop there. And it remains active with the community that is there today. And it is a very thin place, as the Celts would call it, a place where you really sense the presence of God. I can remember I had an adult who went on this pilgrimage, and there was something about her that was different as we went through it, especially as we were arriving and experiencing Iona and everything that we do there. And when we were leaving Iona, she broke down a bit in tears and said, "I was so worried that all of this talk about how wonderful and holy a thin place this is, that I wasn't going to feel anything." And she said, "This is a true thin place now for me as well, having experienced the presence of God in a special way there." This is a shot from the Dunai, which is the highest point on the island of Iona, of the youth hostel where we stay. It's on the far end of the island, very remote. It is absolutely beautiful. John McLean there, who is the one who runs the youth hostel, has become a good friend to us through the years. And he has actually won a lot of awards, ecological awards, for the efforts and the upkeep of that hostel in an environmental friendly way. And as you can see from this gorgeous photo, the geography of the location itself lends itself very much to great reflection and experience. Here we are outside of that youth hostel on Iona. And because we are trying to sort of jumpstart our youth and also our adults on their spiritual journey, so maybe helping them to jump a couple rungs on the ladder, so to speak, of their spiritual journey, that normally we would take a long time to be able to achieve, we find that with the pilgrimage experiences and also even with our short-term mission trips, when we blend them with exposing both youth and adults to new spiritual disciplines, it helps them to sort of mature in a quicker way than they would have otherwise. So on this first day, we have found over the years, especially with our youth, that we need to have more kinesthetic, bodily involved spiritual disciplines for them. They want to be active. And of course, Iona is a great place to walk. So on the first morning, we do a silent meditative walk. And so here we are gathered for that walk. And we get them up the hill from the youth hostel. And we begin a silent meditative walk up to this highest point on the island of Iona, known as Dunai. And if you look closely, you can see we stagger our pilgrims so that they can have a reflective walk in silence up to the top of this hill. And we sort of position this with the story of Jesus when he goes up to a high place for the transfiguration. And the whole point of it is to begin the pilgrimage with an experience of you being God's beloved. And so as God's beloved, we too want to listen to Jesus. So it sets the tone for what we are about. When we get up to the top of that Dunai, the hill, and you see Adam Lee's here, and Adam is one, if you haven't yet already seen, the secondary volume of this reflection on pilgrimage. Adam is one of the people who talks about his pilgrimage experience. He is now in the seminary and is getting ready for his second year in seminary to become an Episcopal priest. When we get everyone up to the top of that hill, we all gather in a circle. Now, we have planted a seed with the adult facilitators for our youth so they will know what we are doing, because we have somebody just go in silence and stand in the middle on the top of that hill overlooking the ocean and the bay on both sides. And we just place our hands upon that person, and there is about a minute of silent prayer. And we take turns doing that for every participant. And for most of them, this becomes sort of the entry into a different mode of being, of reflection, and of course, where we started with, of a realization that they are God's beloved. And it starts to build the teamwork of that pilgrimage class at the same time. Here we are at the top of that hill, having concluded that particular spiritual exercise. And we usually break into a version of "Ain't No Mountain High Enough to Keep Me from Loving You." We have a tradition at the top of that hill to take a group photo before we come back down from the mountain. Another important experience and another thin place on the island of Iona is called Columbus Bay. And this is known to be the place where Columba would have originally landed, whether it was actually this physical place or not. It's so beautiful, it should be. But it is a great place for us to pilgrimage to. And we began our pilgrimage experiences by doing walks to Columbus Bay. But over the years, that has developed into another added spiritual discipline, and that is via boat. So what we do with our youth is half of them do the 3.5 mile hike, and the other half are on a boat that sails over to Columbus Bay. And then after we do our activities, the two groups switch, and the other half hikes back, and the other half takes that boat experience back to the main town there. There is a labyrinth at Columbus Bay, and so we started by having the instruction on how to walk the labyrinth, walking in with your hands and palms down, so you are letting go of all that might be burdensome for you. And then when you get to the center and walk back out, you then walk out with your palms up, ready to receive what God has to give to you. There's an overview shot of this beautiful spot. And what we have our pilgrims do is we have them go to that wonderful area that you saw on the previous slide. There are so many rocks that are there on that beach. We have them just go and choose a couple of rocks, and it becomes clear to them later what the purpose of picking up that rock is. Here is the boat. We have a wonderful friend there by the name of Mark Jardine, who owns the boat that you see behind that little pontoon boat. And we actually use that particular boat for another spiritual discipline with the youth and the adults. And that he will go out into the water and just kill the engine and will just float. And we do an experience with them journaling to do some Ignatian scriptural imaging, where we read the story from the Gospels of the storm at sea, and being in an atmosphere on the sea, and sometimes the water can be a little rougher than it is there today in that photo. And they get to place themselves within that story, as you do with scriptural imaging. And some powerful, powerful things happen when our youth especially start reflecting on the storms in their own life that they might be experiencing. We give them some time, especially our youth, to explore a bit while we're over at Columbus Bay. And then this is a wonderful anecdotal story of Iona. This youth's name is Hannah Crosby Metzger. Hannah was a wonderful, wonderful member of our youth program. She grew up at St. Joseph's, and she happens to be quite the swimmer. And into the cold waters of the North Sea, when we were on Iona, she decided to jump into the water. And she started a tradition now for all of our youth that when they go to Iona, in Hannah's memory, they choose to go into the water as well. It was a tragic occurrence. Hannah was killed by a drunk driver, and at her funeral here at St. Joseph's, we shared with the congregation the collect that Hannah had written. "O gracious God, you have given me a better understanding of the world and how it affects me. Thank you for the beautiful places on this journey that allowed me to think and know you more. God, help me to learn how to be trusting of others, to be able to see the good which you have created, to listen more to myself and to others that help guide me." In God's humor, amen. All of our youth and our adults write a collect, a prayer, towards the end of their pilgrimage experience that sort of summarizes for them what happened internally and spiritually for them as a result of this pilgrimage experience. This becomes the give back to the congregation, because when we have the celebration back at the church, when we are back together, all of these collects are shared as the prayers part of our service with the congregation. For a lot of our pilgrims, this is a very personal, because they reflect and they deal with losses in their life, with broken relationships, difficult relationships, illnesses, sicknesses, death, life's disappointments, losses in their life. And so they write a collect that reflects that, but so as not to require them to be revealing things about themselves that they might not want to reveal. We work with them to fashion their collect in a way that, shall we say, is sanitized, that it still can be impactful to a larger audience, but also protects their personal spiritual journey as well at the same time. We always give a lot of time for journaling. We present each of the pilgrims with a notebook, and during the times when we are doing different experiences, there's always additional time thrown in so that they would have a chance, if they want to capture their thoughts and their feelings in their journal book. This is the Iona Abbey, and we do a spiritual discipline activity there on pilgrimage. To my left, there are a lot of sheep. And we come down here on a day when it's not raining and with our journals, and we do a meditative reading of Psalm 23. And after each of the phrases in Psalm 23, I give some more description as to what the author of the psalm was trying to say, what it meant to say that the Lord is my shepherd, and invite them to end up writing their own version of Psalm 23. These become something that is entered into their journal, and mysteriously they seem to show up every time we have Good Shepherd Sunday at St. Joseph's. Lots of time when we are having some sort of experience, we give them an opportunity to share what's going on within their own heart and mind and soul during the pilgrimage experience. We go to another holy place called Lindisfarne, and this was a place that we had gone to from the time we started the pilgrimages back in 2003. But over the years, having met wonderful people through the Celtic spirituality course of Fuller University, we met Andy and Anna Rain, we met Mark and Mary Fleeson, and we're able to adapt more things into our spiritual experiences because of that relationship. This is a view of our march to Cuthbert's Cave. During the time, St. Cuthbert is one of the main saints connected with Holy Island and the Priory at Lindisfarne. And during the time of the Viking invasion, the story goes that the monks had to whisk the body of Cuthbert away so that it wouldn't be taken away by the Vikings. And one of the places that they sought refuge was at Cuthbert's Cave. So it becomes another place where we go and have an opportunity for some sort of spiritual discipline. Here is the chapel, St. Oran's, that is right next to Iona Abbey. We gather there with the permission of the Abbey officials so that we can have a service at night, and especially with our youth. They design, they put on, they sing, they lead the prayers, they give the sermon for our services that take place as much as possible so that they can share what they are experiencing along the way. Here's another spiritual discipline, and this is one that actually Dallas Willard had introduced me to when I took his course some years ago. And it is joyful proclamation of the Psalms, where you go outside and you read the Psalms in a loud voice, just exulting and praising God. And so we found this ravine when we were in Edinburgh, and we had half of the youth on one side of the ravine and the other half on the other, and they did an antiphonal recitation of the Psalms shouting across the ravine. And it was joyful, it was different, it was a lot of fun, but such that we repeat that with each of our pilgrimage groups that we can. The beauty of the Iona continues to provide opportunities for different opportunities for prayer services and spiritual disciplines. You see Hannah there on the bottom left next to Charles with the guitar. And interestingly enough, when you watch the other portion of this, you will see Hannah's mother, Catherine Metzger, who was able to go on one of our retreat experiences, as it's explained by a fellow pilgrim of her particular pilgrimage, Beth Shires, that when Catherine was able to come on pilgrimage with us, we were able to have a memorial service and leave some of Hannah's ashes on that beach on Iona. That was obviously special to Hannah and to our youth pilgrims. We gather up at the youth hostel on Iona for different prayer services also. And here we are preparing for a Eucharist that is going to be led by our youth. And then they have me as the priest take over when it comes time for the communion portion of the service. We added in a trip also to Inchcombe Abbey. Inchcombe is known as the Iona of the East. We take a trip on a tour boat over to the island. And it is a beautiful place to walk around. And we will usually invite the youth to do some journaling there. And then we gather into a place called the Warming Room. And in the center of that picture, you will see Charles Milling in the red. Charles is one of our music ministers at the church. And also at this time, he was one of the facilitators for our youth. And Charles led the group in what is called a Buddhist meditation. And this one, we did not know how impactful it was going to be for our youth. But this particular group still talks about that experience to this day. And so we have continued it with both our youth and our adult pilgrims when we go to Inchcombe Abbey. Thanks to Fuller, we were exposed to this incredible, incredible person by the name of Andy Rain and his wife, Anna. And Andy led us when we were on the Fuller course in some wonderful liturgical dance, reflective dance, inspirational dance. And it just becomes another amazing way for both adults and our youth that we can experience the presence of God. With our youth, when the weather is nice, we do a lot of it outside. And it can create, with the movement of the body during the spiritual music that Andy is playing for us, some very, very powerful moments for our pilgrims. We were also blessed to meet Mary and Mark Fleeson, who have also become great friends of St. Joseph's. Mary is one of the world experts on Celtic knotwork, and Mary will lead a workshop with our pilgrims where they have the opportunity to try their hand at doing Celtic knotwork as a spiritual discipline. And again, we come back to the use of our journals and our opportunity for capturing those experiences, especially the thoughts and the inspirations that come as we are doing these activities. When we are on the Unholy Island on Lindisfarne, we go to the ruins of the priory, and with the permission of the local authorities, we are able to conduct a Eucharist there, right at the statue that is there. I talked about the stones that we collect on Columbus Bay in Iona. And this becomes a integral part of our pilgrimage experience. What we do with those stones is we ask them to hand over the stone that they have chosen. We place their initials on it at the beginning of our time on Iona, and we mix them up and we give their particular stone to one of the other pilgrims. That pilgrim who has that other person's stone becomes their prayer partner. And that person concentrates their specific prayer for that particular person for the length of the pilgrimage. We do not reveal whose prayer partner is whose, but the symbol of carrying someone's burden, carrying someone's rock, carrying someone's stone becomes one that can be rather powerful on our experience. And in the early days of our pilgrimage, we were concluding that particular exercise when we were getting ready to leave Iona. But we now, because we spend a whole week on Lindisfarne, we then, at the end of our time, take them down to the water's edge, and they reveal one at a time the prayer partner that they had for that pilgrimage experience. The stone or the burden that that person has been carrying for them is given back to them. And hopefully whatever that burden was, they've been able to release it within themselves, but we give them an opportunity for a physical representation of that by taking that stone and throwing it back into the water. This, especially for our adults, has been a very powerful experience. This photo is from our last pilgrimage to Iona and Lindisfarne. We had picked up the stones in Iona. The people who were designated carried that stone for that person, carried that burden for them, praying for them. And then when we are getting ready to leave the island of Lindisfarne at low tide, we then take that rock, that stone that was actually collected on Iona, and then give it back to that person to throw it back into the water on Lindisfarne. Another important part of our experience, just like pilgrims have done for centuries, is to do the actual pilgrimage walk across from the mainland over to the tidal island of Lindisfarne. And so through the years, with different pilgrimage groups, this has taken on different, shall we say, feels. At times, it has been a very holy and quiet and solitary walk. And at other times, when the groups have been such that they have just bonded so much and they are celebrating, as you see here, they are all choosing to do that walk together. Something that becomes another sort of spiritual ritual for us is when they conclude their walk, the pilgrimage walk, we do a service of foot washing at the end of it, where the pilgrims wash each other's feet. They do not know that this is going to be happening, but it also has taken on special meaning because this is now something that we usually do towards the end of our pilgrimage experience and can be very powerful, as we have read the story of Jesus washing the feet of his disciples and then telling them that they too must wash each other's feet for servant ministry. And as we're preparing to go back home and take that experience of the pilgrimage back into our daily lives, this ritual takes on added meaning. This servant song that I'm sure most of you are familiar with always becomes an anthem, especially this particular verse for our pilgrims. We are pilgrims on a journey. We are travelers on the road. We are here to help each other walk the mile and bear the load. Here we are on Lindisfarne, getting ready to leave. I'm explaining to the pilgrimage group how we are going to be giving back those stones, those rocks, those burdens to our prayer partner for them to throw into the sea, getting rid of. Part of the pilgrimage experience for us has been the opportunity, because of the relationships that we develop by going back to these same places, to be given the opportunity to do things that we normally wouldn't be able to do. We are in Roslin Chapel. Now, Roslin Chapel is famous in popular culture now because of a book and movie called The Da Vinci Code. But we've been going to Roslin Chapel before the publication of that book and movie. It is a thin place. It is a beautiful place. It is a place where you feel the presence of God when the tourists are all out of there. The stories for us with Roslin Chapel begin here with this photo when we were able to do Eucharist just with our group. They would invite all of the tourists at the end of the day to leave and invite us to stay and do our experience of Eucharist there. Over time, because of especially the fame of that movie and book, things started to change at Roslin Chapel. And they happened to have so many tourists coming in and so many difficulties that they had to sort of ban anybody from doing services like this. So we were only able to participate in the hourly 5-minute little service that they would do. I would ask over and over again if they would make an exception for our groups because we had been coming there so many times. But the one concession they made with one particular group after this was that they would allow our youth to sing a hymn at the conclusion of that 5-minute service. What happened in that 5 minutes was an amazing experience. All of those areas to the right and left of those pillars were just chock full of tourists who just continued to walk and gaze and look around while the prayer service was going on. But when our youth, and that particular youth group, had an incredible gift for their harmonizing and their singing, and in Roslin Chapel, that is all made of this beautiful masonry, the acoustics are just amazing. When our youth broke into song, the noise, the distractions, the shuffling around of all of those tourists stopped. And for that moment of, it must have only been 2 minutes while they were singing, we ended up creating a moment. And as in my initial slide, those tourists became pilgrims with us. This was an important part in our development of pilgrimage. We began to realize more and more the opportunity that we as pilgrims have of creating a holy moment for other people as well. Over the years, we've developed a relationship with the education director, Fiona Rogan, at Roslin. We've developed a relationship with St. Matthew's Episcopal Church and Father Joe there, who is their priest, such that we now join their congregation on Sunday for Eucharist. I've been blessed that Father Joe has invited me to join him at the altar and to give the sermon several times at Roslin Chapel. But overall, it shows just the impact the pilgrimage has, not only just on the pilgrims themselves, but for others who are observing us. One of the other gifts that we have had through developing a relationship and friendship with our Celtic friends from Lindisfarne, we were able to have Mark and Mary Fleeson and their children join us at St. Joseph's. And not only once, but twice they were able to be with us. And most recently, I went on my sabbatical experience. And as part of the sabbatical, we were able to fund airline tickets for both Mark and Mary Fleeson and their family, and Andy and Anna Rain to come to St. Joseph's to conduct what we called a staycation Celtic pilgrimage experience, so that the congregation, especially those who for health reasons or financial reasons aren't able to go on pilgrimage, could get sort of a virtual experience of what pilgrimage is like. Here you see Mark, who is in the black there towards the angel paintings in the front, leading them in some Celtic dance and singing. Mary was able to work and give a workshop in the Celtic drawing and the Celtic knotwork. And here you see her working with some of our pilgrim friends, some who had been on pilgrimage before, some who might never not have that opportunity to go to Lindisfarne. We have tried to do something different with each, especially of our youth pilgrims, so that they can say that they did something that nobody else did, to sort of give their mark on their spiritual experience. This particular group, we decided that we would try to do a bicycle pilgrimage. And there are two monasteries connected with a saint by the name of Venerable Bede. And the two monasteries, Jarrow and Monkwearmouth, they had opened up a pilgrimage route for bicycles. And so we decided that we would try this with our youth as an opportunity to get them outdoors, but also to sort of have a different type of a pilgrimage experience. We never made it from place to place, but it sort of reinforced for us the fact that it is not about the destination, it is about the journey. And there was great reflection that the youth gave from having this particular experience. We also were able to develop a relationship with the folks at the church in Jarrow, and this is the warden of the church, Jimmy Guy. Jimmy, over the years, developed sort of an affinity for our groups, especially our youth. And on this particular visit, we were able to conduct a Sunday Eucharist on a Sunday afternoon at the church in Jarrow, at the same time as St. Joseph's back in Florida was having their main service on Sunday. We were able to coordinate such that the time of what we call the prayers of the people was being conducted simultaneously in both locations. So we were able to share the prayers of the people from Bede's Monastery in Jarrow at the same time as they were doing it at St. Joseph's in Boynton Beach, Florida. Jimmy was able to get on the phone, as he is here, and share in that prayer with our congregation. We were also able to experience this wonderful saint by the name of Lillian Grove. Lillian is now retired, but has won many, many awards for her being a guide, a rather famous guide, at Durham Cathedral. And even in our 2018 pilgrimage, we were able to convince her to come out of retirement and be the guide at Durham for our groups. Another important fashion of our pilgrimage experience, especially with our youth, but also our adults, is the community building that takes place. We cook together, we eat together, we clean up together. This particular photo depicts an exercise that we do with our youth, where it is the adults and the facilitators who serve the youth at this particular meal. The adults have set the table. The adults have cooked the food. They're getting ready to serve the food. And the youth are now receiving instruction that this is a hospitality dinner and that they are not allowed to do anything for themselves other than to eat with their knife and fork and spoon. So if there is salt that they want, they have to somehow communicate to someone else to give them the salt. If they find that they are out of the beverage they are drinking, they have to get someone else to pour it for them. And it enables them to be taking care of others so that they might be taken care of. It always ends up being a wonderful experience with lots of laughs, but also it enables them to sort of get into the idea that it's just not about taking care of myself, but taking care of others too. The washing of the dishes becomes another thing that helps us to build community. Here we are in the Iona kitchen. And we cook together. It becomes an opportunity for the youth to learn more about what it takes to put on a nice meal. But the thing that it has done for St. Joseph's has to do also with the hospitality we are able to extend to others who are taking care of us. We have become known in Iona and Lindisfarne for the meals that we put on and invite those who are taking care of us to come and be our guests. So when we are on Iona, the people who run the youth hostel, John and his workers, the people who we meet along the way, Mark Jardine, who is the skipper of the boat that I showed you the photo of earlier, and anyone else who is helping us along the way, we invite them to come and be our guest. It has become a powerful charism for our groups that we try and take care and be hospitable, offering hospitality to those who give hospitality to so many pilgrims over time. Here you see one of our adult pilgrimages as we are joined there by all of the people that we had met along the way on that particular pilgrimage group. Sometimes the most important things that God has in store for us are the things that happen that we had not planned. For example, on this last pilgrimage, we happened to be flying through Amsterdam on a time when there was something called Black Friday as we were coming home. This was some pilgrimages ago. And it was all females who I was taking, adult females, many of them retirement age, and everything was canceled, all the flights, and we had to figure out how we were going to get everybody home. And we had to divide up, and some people had to fly through Amsterdam, some through Budapest, some through Belgium, I think. And Cheryl May is going to talk about this when you watch your other edition of this pilgrimage video. And the experience that enabled and the confidence that I think it gave to them was one of the powerful learnings from that whole pilgrimage. This photo that you see before you, we were in St. James Park in London. One of our pilgrimages, we ended in London, and we were having a picnic there in the park. And it was at a time we had left on that pilgrimage on the day that the London bombings had taken place. We did not know if we were going to go on that pilgrimage, but the adults and the youth decided that they were going to go, and we put in special things that would be as safety cautious as we could. We would not be doing anything that would identify us as targets. We were going to not take any public transportation. And we put all these safeguards in place. And one of those is on the day that normally we would turn little groups loose to do things, they were all staying with us in St. James Park in London for a picnic. This happened to be the day when the subway bombings took place in London. We were in St. James Park when all chaos broke loose and there were police and sirens everywhere. And we were there in this park and the bobbies, the police, were running around, and finally I was able to get one of them to stop. And I asked him what was happening, and he said what was happening with the bombings. And I asked him what we should do, and he said, "You are in the safest place you could possibly be." After the chaos subsided and we're able to leave the park, we got a special edition of one of the London newspapers, and we saw the locations of where those bombs had gone off. And they formed a perfect cross to our north and south and east and west. And we had been perfectly positioned in the center of that cross. It was a powerful realization that we had been protected. And it is an experience that to this day, all of our pilgrims remember. We've had many other opportunities where things seem to go wrong, but they end up being the thing that God uses to bring us closer together. On this very last pilgrimage, we, because of all kinds of flight cancellations, we had to fly, instead of into Edinburgh, had to fly into London and figure out how to get a train from London up to Edinburgh. And it was an absolute chaotic mess, but our pilgrims remember that as that which brought them together as a group, and one of the powerful experiences as they began their time together on pilgrimage. When we concluded this last pilgrimage that we did, the last one that we did, and I will say, by the way, that we've done 12 pilgrimages to Iona and Lindisfarne, 7 of them with our youth, 5 with our adults. We are still scheduled to do one with our youth this summer, but obviously with the situation and international travel, that's probably not going to happen. But when we concluded our pilgrimage in 2018, we had encountered in many of the places that we went, there was work being done, either refurbishment or expansion, and we seemed to find scaffolds everywhere that we went. And for me, that sort of became a symbol, and it became even more of a symbol as we reflect on the experiences of the particular people that were on that pilgrimage. But I think sharing this particular little prayer poem that I wrote to conclude that pilgrim experience will give you a sense of what it has been and continues to be all about for us at St. Joseph's, with so much energy that we give towards our pilgrimage experience. God of the scaffolds, who heals and sustains, you've enabled us to deal with our burdens and pains. Just as the first 12 came to follow and learn, you've given to these 12 18 days to discern. Though our hearts can be broken as we live through life's seasons, in many ways you have spoken that each heart has its reasons. That reason does not know, but you call us to go deeper and deeper to find our own peace of mind. And your scaffolding embrace keeps us in place, till at last we can look back with mended fissures and cracks, and know again we'll be whole with you in control. So God of the scaffolds, reinforce each of us as we search for your presence. Help us to trust, to know you support us when all seems to go wrong. Reinforce you will hold us till again we are strong. Reinforce the thin places that enable us to your presence awake, and with each of our lives, a new cathedral make. Amen. When we come back from each of our pilgrimage experiences, we go straight back into the church, to the altar, from where we had started the whole experience. And I always share this quote from T.S. Eliot as we conclude. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. My experience of pilgrimage is that when pilgrims come home to St. Joseph's, they experience their spiritual lives in a new way. When I did my doctoral work, we did surveys with our pilgrims and the impact, largely perception-based, but also in terms of their involvement and commitment in terms of ministry at this church. Without exception, almost, we see for our youth that there is more of an emphasis of their lives on their spiritual journey. Some that didn't seem to get it when we were there, a couple of years later will come back and say what an impact positively it has on them now. For our adults, I have no hesitation to say that every single pilgrim, when they come back, they're going to be more committed to their worship experience, their spiritual lives, their financial support, and their ministry at our church. It is an expensive proposition. It requires a lot of the resources of fundraising, and for our adults who pay for this experience themselves, and for our youth who do fundraising for years to make it possible for them to have this experience, I can say without a doubt, it is more than worth it. To have the opportunity to spend 18 days where there is no responsibility other than to think about and work on your spiritual lives has paid great dividends for us. I thank you all for this time and bearing with me through all of this. And I know John and Olive have my contact information, so if there is ever any way that we can be helpful at St. Joseph's to your own planning or experience of pilgrimage, we'd be more than happy to share it with you. May God continue to bless us all on our spiritual journey.